January 1st, 2024 marked the end of the copyright protections for Disney's foundational character Steamboat Willie. You may have noticed him at the beginning of a few Disney movies. If you don't recognize him, don't feel too bad. He's one of the original versions of the character we all know as Mickey Mouse. But what happens when this character that has become so closely protected by Disney for so long is now available in the public domain? Well, something like this happens. The other day, I found myself reminiscing, as I often do, about the Disney classics, but not just any classic, but the original classic, Steamboat Willie. So when hearing about the recent screening of a film involving the character, I became rather interested. However, to my surprise, this Steamboat Willie was nothing like I remembered. In the new film Screamboat, instead of seeing a happy mouse steering a ferry boat, I watched a horror show. It was slightly funny, but still very disturbing. And it got me thinking, what happens when the key animated characters from our childhoods and the very thing that made animation studios like Disney so prolific becomes available for anyone to use? Well, that's what happens when copyright expires. And we may chuckle and laugh at the absurdity of it all, but this is not a small issue, even for a character as old as Steamboat Willie. Because in the words of Walt Disney himself, it all started with a mouse. Now, the birth of Mickey Mouse actually has a pretty interesting story, because while Disney says that it all started with a mouse, I would say it actually all started with a rabbit. Let me explain. By 1927, Disney had created various businesses, most of them failing. In 1919, at the age of 18 years old, Disney met Ub Iwerks while working at Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio. With Disney being a natural storyteller and Iwerks being a very skilled draftsman, they eventually set off on their own to create Iwerks Disney Company. However, they eventually had to close down when their biggest customer went bankrupt. After that failed, Disney created Laugh-O-Gram Studio, inviting Ub Iwerks again to join him for a second try. It is here where they created Alice's Wonderland in 1923, which blended live action and animation, but also did not work out and the company had to close down. Finally, Disney moved to Hollywood to create Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio with his brother, Roy Disney. And no, I'm not confusing them for the Warner Brothers. Pay attention. Disney even invited Ub Iwerks for a third time to join him. It was at this point that Walt Disney stopped animating, so he needed someone with Iwerks' skill to lead the animation department. To entice him, he gave him 20% share into the company. Together, and with their small team of animators, they continued to create Alice comedies, but also they created a new popular character, and it's not what you're thinking. He comes later. No, they created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and it's important to understand how animation studios worked during this time. The success of many animation studios at that time were based on the popularity of their character. At that time, Disney had a contract with Winkler Pictures to create Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons, and they licensed the character out to Universal Studios. At the time, Universal Studios wanted something like the character Felix the Cat, who was huge at the time and one of the first characters to be a global animated icon. And for a while, it worked out really well for Disney. However, Charles Mintz, who was the husband of Margaret Winkler and took over control of Winkler Pictures when he married her, got a little greedy. When Disney went to Mintz to negotiate a new deal, Mintz told him that he had secretly stole all his animators from him. And since Disney legally did not have the rights to Oswald, he stole the rabbit too. What's funny though is 2 months prior, Ub Iwerks tried to warn both Walt and Disney about this, but they didn't really take him seriously. So Disney needed a new character or else he was gonna have another failure. And luckily, they were able to come up with something. Not a girl, not a cat, not a rabbit, but a mouse. Now, Walt Disney has told many different stories on how the character of Mickey Mouse was told. The most reliable narrative comes from Ub Iwerks, where immediately after Oswald and the animators were stolen, him and Disney immediately brainstormed different characters. It's important to remember that Disney no longer animated at this time, so it was Iwerks that sketched out different ideas that they could use. They finally settled on a mouse, first named Mortimer, but eventually changed to Mickey Mouse. Ub Iwerks would then immediately set out creating Mickey Mouse's first cartoon called Plain Crazy, and they then would go on to release another short called Steamboat Willie. And the animation that you see at the beginning of many Disney movies is the very animation that Ub Iwerks drew. But you would never know that. His name isn't even there. You do kind of see him in the 100th anniversary video though, so at least there's that. It's also really interesting that Mickey Mouse came out during the midst of the Great Depression. So it's interesting to see how Disney was doing very well during a time that so many people in America were suffering. But you can see that owning the rights to animated characters has a strong importance not just for the industry, but also for Disney company and legacy as well. In 2006, they were able to get back the rights of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, which allowed us to get some fun scenes in Epic Mickey. Anyone here play Epic Mickey? There's some great stuff in there. It kind of goes over some of the things I'm talking about, you know, between the ink monsters. The important thing to know about animation copyright is that copyrights protect the expression of an idea, not the idea itself. Now, what does that mean? That means that you can't have a copyright for a broad concept or general thought like a boy goes to a wizard school to learn magic. Because if that was the case, Harry Potter would be sued up the arse because it wasn't the first to do that concept, nor will it be the last. But rather, you can protect the specific way that idea is conveyed, like through books, movies, script, etc. But here is where the problem comes. For years at this point, Disney has been lobbying for changes to copyright laws to allow for extensions and has had substantial impact on the copyright laws that currently exist today. But for works created by corporations, that copyright only lasts 95 years from the date of publication or 120 years from its creation, whichever comes first, which is slightly different than works that are created by individuals, which last the lifespan of the creator plus 70 years. And so that means that every one of Disney's and frankly any character from any studio is on a clock on how much they can take advantage of it before it could be possibly ruined by outside interference. And we already started to see this with one of Disney's characters, Winnie the Pooh, whose copyright expired in 2022 because the original book that it's based on was written in 1926. But Disney still holds a specific expression of the character, which protects it for a bit. And that is what will save characters like Mickey Mouse for the time being, because there have been multiple expressions of the character over the years. So while Steamboat Willie's version is up for grabs, the other versions are safe for now. And the only thing that they need to do to keep it this way is to keep updating the character every decade or so, and also just go after any studio that even thinks and tries to use the character. And that brings me to the movie Screamboat, and I will say I had fun watching this movie. It's very much a horror comedy, but the murders are pretty graphic at times, but I wouldn't say scary. It takes place over one night on a New York ferry boat. Steamboat Willie is described in the movie as an experiment that went wrong and was momentarily saved by a man named Walter, but eventually forgotten about in the lower decks of the boat, which made him a little murdery. They use a live action style where they have the actor David Howard Thornton wearing a Steamboat Willie costume, but spoiler alert, they do show the original Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse version animated in the film. I did think it was cute how there were other people dressed up like Disney characters, like Peter Pan was there. They had a group of women dressed up as princesses. It was neat. But this movie is just an inkling of what Disney has to deal with as their copyrights begin to expire, like Steamboat Willie whistling as he decapitates a captain. And like the Winnie the Pooh movie, there are already other examples of this. It's interesting that the first move for these types of projects is horror, maybe because it's a low budget option and Disney may not take it too seriously because it's not competing with their family audiences, but they have to see the potential of this damaging their brand eventually. You know, more damage than it already is. I'm actually not too worried about this, and this is easy to say as a consumer. Companies like Disney have already benefited from stories and characters that are in the public domain. You can argue that their public domain fairy tale characters are the reason they're even still around today. And this is probably the reason that we are seeing all of these live action remakes, because they want to get ahead of it before others do in like 70 years. And this might be also why we see them trying to launch new original characters like Moana, Encanto, Zootopia that are not based on established fairy tales. But I think eventually it will be clear that there is someone else out there that can tell these stories better than Disney can. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think about this. Are you worried about the copyrights expiring for your favorite characters, or do you see this as an opportunity for new, innovative storytelling? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Well, I guess my work here is done. To the Mickey Copter.
All right, this is for the people who made it towards the end of the video. I want to pitch an idea. Stay with me. An idea that we can do for Mickey Mouse when his copyright officially is up in a few years, whatever number of years, unless Disney makes it an immortal copyright, which I wouldn't put it past them. My idea is pretty simple. It's not fully fleshed out, but it's basically an idea where you have a guy who's been banned from the Disney parks, but to get in and ride all the rides that he wants to, because there's like a new ride or new attractions that have been added to the park, to get in, he disguises himself as Mickey Mouse because one of his friends is usually the Mickey Mouse or one of the Mickey Mouses for that day. So instead he takes the costume and pretends to be him. But some people find out and they slowly try to hunt him down. But I just think that's kind of like a neat, fun idea. You can do a lot of comedic things with that. And also just seeing Mickey Mouse is like a character that would be in any part of the park. So you could see like any part of the park. Some characters are specific to one area, but Mickey Mouse can kind of traverse any area because he's not based on one location or theme. So I just think that would be a cool idea. It will be family friendly. So, there's that. Better than Screamboat. All right. Like and subscribe. Bye.